Hi, I'm Judy Vitale, readthestars.com, and this video is all about Saturn in Scorpio. I'm going to try to condense a lot of information into a very short period of time, so I know that there will be things missing from this discussion, but my purpose is more to stimulate your thinking than it is to cover everything possible there is to discuss about this topic. Saturn is entering Scorpio on October 5th, 2012 at 4:33 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time. It will stay there until December of 2014. So this is a big change. Saturn always spends a little over 2 years in each of the signs, and it is time for it to enter Scorpio. The last time that Saturn was in Scorpio was August 1983 to November 1985. So you have to think back and realize one thing. Yes, Saturn is going to affect each of us personally as it goes into a different place in our charts, and it covers a certain area of our lives. Saturn's effect is normally to create challenges and also to provide structure. So if you have an area of your life that feels a little bit more challenged over the next 2 years, you can pretty well count on you're experiencing Saturn in that area. There are horoscopes on my site with the article about Saturn in Scorpio that will tell you a little bit about what that's going to feel like for you. So we had Saturn go into Libra in July of 2010. So if you felt a little bit of a shift, if you can identify something that happened in your life around then, you might be able to see what it is like, what is going to change, or what's ending and what's beginning. So let's talk a little bit about what some of the astrology's wisdom might say about Saturn in Scorpio. Saturn is being a planet that likes structure and likes the definition between day and night, is not so happy in the sign of Scorpio, because Scorpio is all about mixing up and confusing and concealing, because Scorpio is in charge of the sacred process of regeneration, the kind of thing that takes place when the lotus blossom comes up out of the muck. You see this beautiful flower, but you understand that underneath there is this muck, this compost, this mess of everything that is dead coming back into life. And so that's really what's going on in Scorpio, if you want to think of Scorpio like as being a manor or a place where the planet comes to visit. So Saturn is walking into this very murky place, and so it tends to be very uncomfortable. But it also helps Scorpio to unearth things, to bring things out into the open, and to make corrective measures for different trends in the society that are perhaps leading it astray. Interesting that it also has to do with the overdevelopment of the self, the ego, the selfishness that goes along with having Saturn in Scorpio. And the person will not even be aware of this if the person has Saturn in Scorpio, but there is an over-analysis of who the person is. Makes a great psychologist or astrologer. I happen to have Saturn in Scorpio, so I can speak a little bit to that. Yes, there is a tremendous desire to know who oneself is and to build that self-esteem thing up. If you remember, those of you who are old enough and those of you who are not, you can look it up in any kind of history of popular culture. Back in 1983, 1984, there was this huge move towards self-esteem. And it all came out of the recovery movement, people understanding that they were addicted to the drugs and the alcohol that were flowing so freely during the 1960s, 70s, 80s, that whole generation of people. And in the 80s in particular, when cocaine became very prominent, and they told people that cocaine was not addictive, you could go ahead and take as much of it as you want. And I think everybody from that era has at least one friend who was going through the carpet looking for the little grains of that stuff they weren't addicted to, just so they could get a little bit more. And, listening to the music of that period, you can hear the cocaine in it if you listen to it. And so it's very interesting. Yes, cocaine has survived, of course, But the immense amount of people who became addicted at that period of time led to this recovery movement, which was all about the discovery of self, a very Saturn and Scorpio thing. Now, the other thing that came out was the AIDS epidemic. Now, we really began to notice AIDS like in 1991, 1992, or I'm sorry, 1981, 1982. But it was, in fact, 1983, I don't want to go back that far, but it's true, 1983 was the moment in time when we had Robert Gallo, a doctor who identified the AIDS virus, and then the blood tests and the screenings, the corrective measures for this disease became available. And it changed the way that people looked at sex. From the 1960s through the 70s and the 80s up until then, there was this huge free sex moment. And, you know, it was like, hi, I love you, and let's go to bed. And that was what went on. And all those disco songs really were true. People were really doing that. Not everyone, but some of us were not, and some of us were. So, anyway, it was definitely a time when people thought that anything went. Well, when Saturn went into Scorpio, some of that went. When people began to understand that there could be severe consequences from having sex with everybody that one were to encounter. That alone is worth 500 videos to discuss, but I'm just kind of throwing that out for you to consider. In the world, we had Ronald Reagan as president in the United States. He was reelected during Saturn and Scorpio. The economy did recover. Saturn has to do with investments, and Scorpio has to do with investments, and so, you know, the two kind of get along together there. But of course, there is a lot of concealment. There's a lot of treachery and the other sorts of things going on around money because people become greedy. There could be scandals and a little bit of inhibition about certain things as well, and the inevitability of death certainly brought it forth by the AIDS epidemic back then, and God knows what over the next 2 years is an issue with Saturn and Scorpio. It is sort of the Grim Reaper coming to stir up the muck. So all kinds of things could be revealed. In the world of the economy, we had the Bell system breakup, which was, the Bell system was, there was one phone company in the United States, and now look at us, we have several of them. And it was a big deal when this happened. This was something that was a result of the Reagan administration, which was very much in favor of promoting free enterprise, and they didn't see the reason why you know, we had to have one Bell system, so it became broken up, and people started new communications companies, and the cell phones started to appear a few years after that. Believe it or not, there was a world without cell phones. There was a world that did not beep as much. This was the time when it became more common for people to own personal computers. You know, 1983, 1984. It was a booming industry. I think a lot of people miss that. You know, they think, oh, well, if we just do this and that, and then the economy is going to change. There was a huge industry being born when we had this gigantic resurgence in the early 80s, and it was, in fact, the information revolution. So I think people ignore that. Other leaders that we had in the world were Margaret Thatcher and Mikhail Gorbachev, and there was a conservative tone to the government, most certainly. We had also the toxic gas explosion and the resulting deaths, you know, thousands of people dying and being injured in Bhopal, India, the chemical explosion. So these are just some of the things, again, that I've noticed by just taking a quick look at a historical timeline and going back into the cobwebs of my memory. And for those of us who are Saturn and Scorpio, it's going to be a Saturn return. If it's your first Saturn return, we'll be discussing that. There are some interesting things coming up on Read the Stars that we're going to be talking about on what happens when Saturn comes back to the place where it was when you were born.